Between Sharks and Hopes, episode 67 of NES Works is all about the Great Whites. Last episode we saw Gotcha, the first of several games co-produced by American toy company LJN and future Japanese RPG powerhouse and controversy magnet Atlus. It was also the first collaboration between these companies to be farmed out to a subcontractor for development, and to be based on a film property. Like celebrity deaths, mediocre games come in threes, because this episode continues the Gotcha streak. Like that game, both Jaws and The Karate Kid come to us from LJN and Atlus, appear to have been subcontracted out, and are based on movies. Both also attempt to punch above their weight class. Two, as we'll see, mixed results. Of the two, Jaws is the more successful effort. It's not amazing, but for a game that, according to the Game Developers Research Institute, was completed in the space of a month by a company for hire, hired by another company for hire, and based on a god-awful movie, it ain't bad. Jaws, of course, was another Universal Studios property that presumably fell into LJN's lap due to their being owned by MCA, the music label aspect of the Universal biz. We've seen a whole lot of NES and Game Boy games published by Japanese music labels, so in a way the MCA LJN thing amounts to the American version of Pony Canyon FCI. In that light, Jaws is a lot more impressive. It's hard to imagine the purveyors of bland nothings from Pony Canyon ever producing a game that tries to do as much as Jaws, and does it as competently. I suppose the trick is in lining up the right talent. Jaws was created by Westone. Anyway, we'll see more of Westone in NES Works 1988, when their most famous franchise arrives on NES, Wonder Boy, aka Hudson's Adventure Island. The original Wonder Boy hails from 1986 and was a pretty sizable hit, quickly seeing conversions to computers and multiple Sega platforms under its original name, and to Nintendo platforms as Adventure Island. Westone quickly began working on bigger, better sequels to Wonder Boy. But it looks like they also picked up a few contract gigs to keep the lights on while waiting for the receipts to come in on their arcade debuts. Thus Jaws, a game created hastily for Atlus, and the company's first time working on NES hardware. Jaws, the game, appears to be a mashup of the classic 1975 thriller by Steven Spielberg, in which a massive shark terrorizes a New England resort town, and the absolutely terrible summer 1987 Jaws the Revenge, in which all the top-flight talent from the earlier films was replaced by lesser celebrities, plus Michael Caine in a blatant bid for gravitas. Thankfully, the game skips all the melodrama about revenge and sadness and being angry at a sea creature designed by nature to eat because it ate your loved one, and jumps straight to sailing around to destroy said sea creature. Actually, you destroy a lot of sea creatures here, though in fairness, they don't have any compunctions about behaving likewise toward you. Jellyfish, stingrays, and baby smaller sharks populate the tropical oceans of the game, and the slightest contact with your diver will instantly kill you. That's nature, baby. Red of tooth and claw, and stinger and tentacle, I guess. Most of your time playing Jaws is spent in a side view format, swimming around the sea and pumping sea life full of spear gun darts. This could easily have been the entire game, and honestly, had Jaws been developed back in 1986 for Famicom and belatedly adapted to NES, it probably would have just been a Skoona-like. But Westone created Jaws specifically and exclusively for the US market, which means it was a brand new, freshly created game when it hit the NES in November of 1987. And that means it was conceived right as Dragon Quest Mania hit full swing in Japan, and everyone said, "Oh man, our games should be RPGs too." Westone certainly wasn't immune from this. When Wonder Boy and Monsterland arrived, it upgraded the weapon icon indicator in the original Wonder Boy's HUD into a proper equipment system. Wonder Boy collected currency and traded it at shops for new gear in a streamlined adaptation of the RPG format. Westone created Jaws right around the same time as Wonder Boy and Monsterland, and there's also more than a hint of desultory RPG here as well. It's incredibly stripped down. Rather than having towns to explore, it simply has 2 ports where you can dock to purchase a limited selection of upgrades. When you leave port, you sail around the surface of the ocean from a top-down view, and you enter the underwater combat sequences randomly. As in Dragon Quest, the different ocean areas in which you enter combat are reflected in the scenery you swim through, and creature selection you contend with. Getting caught in the shallows can be rough, since you don't have much depth to maneuver through, though the limited space does make it easier to retrieve the items your underwater victims drop. When you pump a stingray or jellyfish full of darts, you'll sometimes drop an icon to be collected. A crab makes your diver move more quickly. A star adds points to your total and allows you to visit a bonus game more quickly, and shells are your currency. Once you collect a set number of shells, you can visit a port and cash them in for upgrades to your boat and diver. Initially, you'll simply receive a sonar that pulses when Jaws himself is nearby, but after that you'll be given power boosts for your spear gun. You need these upgrades because without them you'll never be able to defeat Jaws and complete the game. Jaws, you see, is the ever-threatening presence lurking beneath the ocean waves. He'll pop up randomly as a dorsal fin when you're sailing around, and if you collide with a sprite, you'll enter a standard underwater battle scene where Jaws constantly roams back and forth. Jaws has his own health meter that needs to be whittled down in order to defeat him, and this is nearly impossible unless your power level is above a 3. He's a very durable shark. Once you manage to wear Jaws' health down to 0, you enter the in-game sequences, which unfortunately is where Jaws the game kind of falls apart. Honestly, everything up to this point is pretty decent. There's not much to Jaws, but it feels like a modernization of the Atari 2600 game design ethos. It's multimodal, takes place across several screens, and can be completed in about 15 to 20 minutes. There's even that bonus game which could have been released as a standalone Atari game called, I don't know, Jellyfish Bomber. And Jaws himself hints at an Atlus-produced game that would arrive 20 years later. He's a powerful boss, is the only enemy that can be seen during exploration, has to be defeated with specific tactics, and can show up unexpectedly in random encounters. Meaning that even in the Bahamas... Unfortunately, once you wear down Jaws, you enter a very unintuitive and clunky final encounter screen where you approach him from a first-person viewpoint. Your goal is to skewer Jaws with the prow of your boat, and unless you've actually suffered through the film that inspired the game, the sequence is pretty opaque. You fire off flash charges that for some reason cause Jaws to leap from the water. When the shark leaps, you surge forward and stab him with your boat. Unfortunately, your attack is really fussy and hard to line up, and you only have 3 attempts before you're forced to start all over again. Meanwhile, the random encounters grow more and more challenging the longer you play, to the point that eventually you'll be fighting nothing but sharks. It's difficult to survive long enough to face off Jaws again. It doesn't help that whenever you die, you lose a level of power, all your speed boosts, and half your shell currency. While losing half your cash when you die is extremely inspired by Dragon Quest, it promotes an unfortunate failure loop if you take too long to complete the game. You face increasingly steep odds in the random encounters that pop up as you're trying to reach port and boost your power, which means you're way more likely to die and lose even more power as well as the shells you need for your upgrade. Despite these frustrations, there's honestly a pretty good game here. Imagine if Westone had been given more than a month to create Jaws. It probably could have been one of the stronger games of 1987. Instead, we end up with a messy game that hints at greatness, though one that is nowhere near as crummy as its internet reputation would suggest. Now, if you want a genuinely lousy game, look no further than the third release in the LJN Atlus trifecta, The Karate Kid. Based on the movie by the same name and its sequel, The Karate Kid is legitimately poor. I almost said worst NES platformer we've seen so far, but that's only because my brain momentarily blanked out the existence of Super Pitfall, presumably in a desperate attempt to protect my sanity. The Karate Kid takes place across 4 stages, loosely inspired by the movies in which Pat Morita turns Ralph Macchio into the great white hope of martial arts by making him do yard work.
All in the wrist.
And, honestly, doing yard work would be a lot more fun than playing this game. The Karate Kid kind of resembles a hybrid of Kung Fu and Karate Champ. Heck, it even has a one-on-one Karate Champ style fighting mode for 2 people, making it, technically, the first proper fighting game on NES if you really want to be generous. However, this is profoundly worse than either of those other 2 games. The game begins in a quick fighting tournament that I think is supposed to represent the climactic scene of the original movie, where Daniel-san uses the limited control interface to make short work of a succession of competitors. There's no sweep-the-leg cheating here, you just power through 4 dudes and move along. From there, the game becomes a scrolling brawler with a hint of platforming. It's innocuous enough at first. Daniel-san has the requisite Jackie Chan moves here, including forward and low punches, high and sweep kicks, and a limited array of special punches and kicks for extra power. Stage 2, which is set in Okinawa, is fairly easy. Goons attack, you knock them down. Sometimes projectiles fly at you, which knock you back but don't cause injury. Occasionally, you can grab power-ups, including Mr. Miyagi, and enter doors for minigames based on movie trademarks like catching flies with chopsticks. It's not great. The controls feel loose and collision detection is even looser. It's easy for bad guys to surround you and take advantage of the knockback effect and the lack of mercy invincibility here to juggle you infinitely until you die. But fortunately, the Okinawa level is easy enough that this isn't an issue. Things go horribly wrong with Stage 3 though. It's a reskin of Stage 2 set in a typhoon. Inexplicably, the developers appear to have seen the punishing windy stages in Super Mario Bros. 2 The Lost Levels and said, wow, this isn't fun, let's do this. So suddenly you have to grapple not only with the flimsy controls and janky hit detection, but also with wind that constantly pushes you backward, and flying debris that sails through the air and will cause you to fly back if it connects, which it will. It's an absolutely miserable game experience, made all the worse by the way the bad guys will randomly walk onto the screen after you've begun a leap over a pit, punch you out of the air, and into a hole for a cheap, instant death. Stage 4 mercifully ditches the wind, but it beefs up all the bad guys, so they require multiple hits to take down. It's also full of rocky terrain, which makes it difficult to line up your attacks. All of this culminates in an extraordinarily awful martial arts showdown for the final battle. You fight on a platform, over a pit, to rescue a young woman from the villain Chozen, but there are some weird and annoying conditional factors you have to deal with. If you knock Chozen off the platform, he'll respawn with full health. This means you need to defeat him on the platform. The problem with the setup is that you're fighting in front of the girl you're trying to rescue, and every time you land a blow on Chozen, she'll scoot backward to avoid being hurt herself. In fact, she'll scoot right off the edge of the platform in her fear, and if she falls, she doesn't respond with full health. Instead, you lose a life. I guess this could be an interesting factor to manage if not for the fact that she only has to scoot away like twice before she falls. Meanwhile, Chozen takes more than a dozen blows to defeat on the easiest difficulty level. That's not good math. So yeah, that's the Karate Kid. This is the kind of game that gave LJN such a miserable reputation in the NES days. If the company had just continued to churn out Gotcha and Jaws caliber work, they wouldn't be anyone's favorite publisher, but they'd slot right in with the middling publishers like Data East and Bandai. Instead, Karate Kid would launch LJN's long-running legacy of absolutely dreadful licensed bilge, especially once Acclaim bought the label. Stuff that was too crappy for Acclaim to put their own name on, which is saying something. Curiously, the Karate Kid appears to have been an internal Atlus project. There's no information online on possible subcontractors, and the ever-helpful Game Developers Research Institute has managed to determine that several Atlus employees, including Quirk composer Tsukasa Masuko, worked on the game, based on an infamous rant hidden in the code to Atlus's Erika to Satoru no Yumiboken. Atlus would get better at making games, but LJN would only get worse. And the Karate Kid, I'm afraid, is sealed forever in silicon and circuitry as complete junk. Next on NES Works, good things are ahead for December 1987, but first we have to break through more mediocrity.